Chapter 10. At the third stroke, it will be 1, 32, and 20 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. Ford Prefect suppressed a little giggle of evil satisfaction, realized that he had no reason to suppress it, and laughed out loud, a wicked laugh. He switched the incoming signal through the sub-Ethernet to the ship's superb hi-fi system, and the odd, rather stilted sing-song voice spoke out with remarkable clarity around the cabin. At the third stroke, it will be 1, 32, and 30 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. He tweaked the volume up just a little, while keeping a careful eye on a rapidly changing table of figures on the ship's computer display. For the length of time he had in mind, the question of power consumption became significant. He didn't want a murder on his conscience. At the third stroke, it will be 1, 32, and 40 seconds. Beep, beep, beep. He checked around the small ship. He walked down the short corridor. At the third stroke, he stuck his head into the small, functional, gleaming steel bathroom. It will be... It sounded fine in there. He looked into the tiny sleeping quarters. 1, 32. It sounded a bit muffled. There was a towel hanging over one of the speakers. He took down the towel. And 50 seconds. Fine. He checked out the packed cargo hold and wasn't at all satisfied with the sound. There was altogether too much crated junk in the way. He stepped back out and waited for the door to seal. He broke open a closed control panel and pushed the jettison button. He didn't know why he hadn't thought of that before. A whooshing, rumbling noise died away quickly into silence. After a pause, a slight hiss could be heard again. It stopped. He waited for the green light to show and then opened the door again into the new empty cargo hold. 1, 33, and 50 seconds. Very nice. Beep, beep, beep. He then went and had a last thorough examination of the emergency suspended animation chamber, which was where he particularly wanted it to be heard. At the third stroke, it will be 1, 34, precisely. He shivered as he peered down through the heavily frosted covering at the dim bulk of the form within. One day, who knew when, it would wake, and when it did, it would know what time it was. Not exactly local time, true, but what the heck. He double-checked the computer display above the freezer bed, dimmed the lights, and checked it again. At the third stroke, it will be... He tiptoed out and returned to the control cabin. 1, 34, and 20 seconds. The voice sounded as clear as if he were hearing it over a phone in London, which he wasn't, not by a long way. He gazed out into the inky night. A star he could see in the distance, the size of a brilliant biscuit crumb, was on Destina, or as it was known on the world from which the rather stilted sing-song voice was being received, Pleiades Zeta. The bright orange curve that filled over half the visible area was the giant gas planet Sassafras Magna, where the Xanthian battleships docked, and just rising over its horizon was a small, cool blue moon, Epun. At the third stroke, it will be... For 20 minutes he sat and merely watched as the gap between the ship and Epun closed. As the ship's computer teased and kneaded the numbers that it would need to bring it into a loop around the tiny moon, close the loop and keep it there, orbiting in perpetual obscurity. 1, 59. His original plan had been to close down all external signaling and radiation from the ship, to render it as nearly invisible as possible, unless you were actually looking at it. But then he had an idea he preferred. It would now emit one single continuous beam, pencil thin, broadcasting the incoming time signal to the planet of the signal's origin, which it would not reach for 400 years traveling at light speed, but where it would probably cause something of a stir when it did. Beep, 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 he snickered. He didn't like to think of himself as the sort of person who giggled or snickered, but he had to admit they'd been giggling and snickering almost continuously for well over half an hour now. At the third stroke, the ship was now locked almost perfectly into its perpetual orbit around a little known and never visited moon. Almost perfect. One thing only remained. He ran again the computer simulation of the launching of the ship's little escapo buggy, balancing actions, reactions, tangential forces, all the mathematical poetry of motion, and saw that it was good. Before he left, he turned out the lights. As his tiny little cigar tube of an escape craft zipped out of the beginning of its 3-day journey to the orbiting space station Port Cesiphron, it rode for a few seconds, a long, pencil-thin beam of radiation that was starting out on a longer journey still. At the third stroke, it will be 2, 13, and 50 seconds. He giggled and snickered. He would have laughed out loud, but he didn't have room. Beep, beep, beep. Chapter 11. Hey Google, stop. Chapter 11. April showers I hate especially. However, non-committally Arthur grunted. The man seemed determined to talk to him. He wondered if he should get up and move to another table, but there didn't seem to be one free in the whole cafeteria. He stirred his coffee fiercely. Bloody April showers! Hate, hate, hate! Arthur stared, frowning out the window. A light, sunny spray of rain hung over the motorway. 2 months he'd been back now. Slipping back into his old life had in fact been laughably easy. People had such extraordinarily short memories, including him. 8 years of crazed wanderings round the galaxy now seemed to him not so much like a bad dream as like a film he had videotaped off television and now kept in the back of the cupboard without bothering to watch. One effect that still lingered, though, was his joy at being back. Now that the Earth's atmosphere had closed over his head for good, he thought wrongly. Everything within it gave him extraordinary pleasure. Looking at the silvery sparkle of the raindrops, he felt he had to protest. Well, I like them, he said suddenly, and for all the obvious reasons. They're light and refreshing, they sparkle and make you feel good. The man snorted derisively. That's what they all say, he said, and glowered darkly from his corner seat. He was a lorry driver. Arthur knew this because his opening, unprovoked remark had been, I'm a lorry driver. I hate driving in the rain. Ironic, isn't it? Bloody ironic. If there was a sequitur hidden in this remark, Arthur had not been able to divine it, and had merely given a little grunt, affable, but not encouraging. But the man had not been deterred then, and was not deterred now. They all say that about bloody April showers, he said. So bloody nice, so bloody refreshing, such charming bloody weather. He leaned forward, screwing his face up as if he was going to say something extraordinary about the government. What I want to know is, if it's going to be nice weather, why can't it be nice without bloody raining? Arthur gave up. He decided to leave his coffee, which was too hot to drink quickly and too nasty to drink cold. Well, there you go, he said, and instead got up himself. Bye. He stopped off at the service station shop and walked back through the parking lot, making a point of enjoying the fine play of rain in his face. There was even, he noticed, a faint rainbow glistening over the Devon hills. He enjoyed that too. He climbed into his battered but adored old black VW Rabbit, squealed the tires, and headed out past the islands of gas pumps and along the slip road to the motorway. He was wrong in thinking that the atmosphere of the Earth had closed finally and forever above his head. He was wrong to think that it would ever be possible to put behind him the tangled web of irresolutions into which his galactic travels had dragged him. He was wrong to think he could now forget that the big, hard, oily, dirty, rainbow-hung Earth on which he lived was a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot, lost in the unimaginable infinity of the universe. He drove on, humming, being wrong about all these things. The reason he was wrong was standing by the slip road under a small umbrella. His jaw sagged. He sprained his ankle against the brake pedal and skidded so hard he very nearly turned the car over. "Fanny!" he shouted. Having narrowly avoided hitting her with the actual car, he hit her instead with the car door as he leaned across and flung it open. It caught her hand and knocked away the umbrella from it, which then bowled wildly across the road. "Shit," yelled Arthur as helpfully as he could, leaped out of his own door, narrowly avoided being run down by McKenna's all-weather haulage, and watched in horror as it ran down Fanny's umbrella instead. The lorry swept along the motorway and away. The umbrella lay like a recently swatted daddy longlegs, expiring sadly on the ground. Tiny gusts of wind made it twitch a little. He picked it up. He said. There didn't seem to be a lot of point in offering the thing back to her. How did you know my name?" she said. "Oh, well, look, I'll get you another one." He looked at her and tailed off. She was tallish, with dark hair which fell in waves around a pale and serious face. Standing still, alone, she seemed almost somber, like a statue to some important but unpopular virtue in a formal garden. She seemed to be looking at something other than what she looked at. She seemed to be looking at something other than what she looks as she was looking at, as if she was looking at. That was a word sentence. Right. But when she smiled, as she did now, suddenly, it was as if she had just arrived from somewhere. Warmth and life flooded into her face, and impossibly graceful movement into her body. The effect was very disconcerting, and it disconcerted Arthur like hell. She grinned, tossed her bag into the back, and swiveled herself into the front seat. "Don't worry about the umbrella," she said to him as she climbed in. "It was my brother's, and he can't have liked it, or he wouldn't have given it to me." She laughed and pulled on her seatbelt. "You're not a friend of my brother's, are you?" "No." Her voice was the only part of her which didn't say good. Her physical presence there in the car, his car, was quite extraordinary to Arthur. He felt, as he let the car pull slowly away, that he could hardly think or breathe, and hoped that neither of these functions was vital to his driving, or they were in trouble. So what he had experienced in the other car, her brother's car, the night he had returned exhausted and bewildered from his nightmare years in the stars, had not been the unbalance of the moment, or, if it had been, he was at least twice as unbalanced now, and quite liable to fall off whatever it was that well-balanced people are supposed to be balancing on. "So," he said, hoping to kick the conversation off to an exciting start, "he was supposed to pick me up, my brother, but phoned to say he couldn't make it. I talked about buses, but the man started to look at a calendar rather than a timetable, so I decided to hitch. So, so, so here I am. And what I would like to know is how you know my name." Uh, "Perhaps we ought to first sort out," said Arthur, looking back over his shoulder as he eased his car into the motorway traffic, "where I'm taking you." Very close, he hoped, or a long way. Close would mean she lived near him, a long way would mean he could drive her there. "I'd like to go to Taunton," she said. "Please, if that's all right. It's not far. You can drop me at—" "You live in Taunton?" he said, hoping that he'd managed to sound merely curious rather than ecstatic. Taunton was wonderfully close to him. He could— "No, London," she said. "There's a train in just under an hour." It was the worst thing possible. Taunton was only minutes away up the motorway. He wondered what to do, and while he was wondering, heard himself with horror saying, "Oh, I can take you to London. Let me take you to London." Bungling idiot! Why on earth he said "let" in that stupid way? He was behaving like a 12-year-old. She looked at him severely. "Are you going to London?" she asked. "Yes," he didn't say. "And I've got a step on it," he failed to add, omitting to glance at his watch. "I wasn't," he said, "but—" Bungling idiot! "It's very kind of you," she said. But really, no. I'd like to go by train." And suddenly, she was gone. Or rather, that part of her which brought her to life was gone. She looked rather distantly out the window and hummed lightly to herself. He couldn't believe it. 30 seconds into the conversation, and he'd already blown it. Grown men, he told himself, in flat contradiction of centuries of accumulated evidence about the way grown men behave, do not behave like this. "Taunton 5 miles," said the signpost. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly the car wobbled. He was going to have to do something dramatic. "Fenny," he said. She glanced sharply round at him. "You still haven't told me how—" "Listen," said Arthur. "I will tell you, though the story is rather strange. Very strange." She was still looking at him, but said nothing. "Listen, you said that." "Did I? Oh, there are things I must talk to you about, and things I must tell you. A story I must tell you, which would—" He was thrashing about. He wanted to do something along the lines of, "Thy knotted and combined locks depart, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon a fretful porcupine," but didn't think he could carry it off, and didn't like the hedgehog reference. "Which would take more than 5 miles," he settled for in the end, rather lamely, he was afraid. "Well, just supposing," he said, "just supposing—" He didn't know what was coming next, so he thought he'd just sit back and listen. "That there was some extraordinary way in which you were very important to me, and that, though you didn't know it, I was very important to you. But it all went for nothing because we only had 5 miles, and I was a stupid idiot at knowing how to say something very important to someone I've only just met and not crash into lorries at the same time. What would you say—" He paused helplessly and looked at her. "I should do?" "Watch the road!" she yelped. "Shit!" He narrowly avoided careening into the side of 100 Italian washing machines and a German lorry. "I think," she said with a momentary sigh of relief, "you should buy me a drink before my train goes." Chapter 12. There is, for some reason, something especially grim about pubs near stations, a very particular kind of grubbiness, a special kind of pallor to the pork pies. Worse than the pork pies, though, are the sandwiches. There is a feeling which persists in England that making a sandwich interesting, attractive, or in any way pleasant to eat is something sinful that only foreigners do. "Make 'em dry," is the instruction buried somewhere in the collective national consciousness. "Make 'em rubbery. If you have to keep the buggers fresh, do it by washing 'em once a week." It is by eating sandwiches in pubs at Saturday lunchtime that the British seek to atone for whatever their national sins have been. They're not altogether clear what those sins are, and don't want to know either. Sins are not the sort of things one wants to know about. But whatever sins there are amply atoned for by the sandwiches they make themselves eat. If there is anything worse than the sandwiches, it is the sausages which sit next to them, joyless tubes full of gristle, floating in a sea of something hot and sad, stuck with a plastic pin in the shape of a chef's hat. A memorial, one feels, for some chef who hated the world and died, forgotten and alone, among his cats on a back stair in Stepney. The sausages are for the ones who know who know what their sins are, and wish to atone for something specific. "There must be something better," said Arthur. "No time," said Fanny, glancing at her watch. "My train leaves in half an hour." They sat at a small, wobbly table. On it were some dirty glasses and some soggy beer mats with jokes printed on them. Arthur got Fanny a tomato juice and himself a pint of yellow water with gas in it, and a couple of sausages. He didn't know why. He bought them for something to do while the gas settled in his glass. The barman dunked Arthur's change in a pool of beer on the bar, for which Arthur thanked him. "All right," said Fanny, glancing at her watch. "Tell me what it is you have to tell me." She sounded, as well she might, extremely skeptical, and Arthur's heart sank. Hardly, he felt, the most conducive setting to try to explain to her as she sat there, suddenly cool and defensive, that in a sort of out-of-body dream he had a telepathic sense that the mental breakdown she had suffered had been connected with the fact that appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, the Earth had been demolished to make way for a new hyperspace bypass, something which he alone on Earth knew anything about, having virtually witnessed it from the Vogon spaceship, and that furthermore, both his body and soul ached for her unbearably, and he needed deeply to go to bed with her as soon as was humanly possible. "Fenny," he started, "I wonder if you'd like to buy some tickets for our raffle. It's just a little one." He glanced up sharply. "To raise money for Angie, who's retiring." "What?" "And needs a new kidney machine." He was being leaned over by a rather stiffly slim, middle-aged woman with a prim knitted suit and a prim little perm and a prim little smile that probably got licked by a prim little dog a lot. She was holding out a small book of cloakroom tickets and a collecting tin. "Only 10 pence each," she said, "so you could probably even buy two without breaking the bank." She gave a tinkly little laugh and then a curiously long sigh, saying, "without breaking the bank" had obviously given her more pleasures than anything since some GIs had been billeted on her in the war. Yeah, all right," said Arthur, hurriedly digging in his pocket and producing a couple of coins. With infuriating slowness and prim theatricality, if there was such a thing, the woman tore off 2 tickets and handed them to Arthur. "I do hope you win," she said with a smile that suddenly snapped together like a piece of advanced origami. "The prizes are so nice." "Yes, thank you," said Arthur, pocketing the tickets rather brusquely and glancing at his watch. He turned toward Fanny. So did the woman with the raffle tickets. "And what about you, young lady?" she said. "It's for Angie's kidney machine. She's retiring, you see. Yes." She hoisted a little smile even further up her face. She would have to stop and let it go soon, or the skin would surely split. Look, here you are," said Arthur, and pushed a 50-pence piece at her in the hope that it would see her off. "Oh, we are in the money, aren't we?" said the woman with a long, smiling sigh. "Down from London, are we?" Arthur wished she wouldn't talk so slowly. "No, that's all right, really," he said with a wave of his hand, as she started with an awful deliberation to peel off 5 tickets one by one. "Oh, but you must have your tickets," insisted the woman, "or you won't be able to claim your prize. They're very nice prizes, you know, very suitable." Arthur snatched the tickets and said thank you as sharply as he could. The woman turned to Fanny once again. "And now, what about—" "No!" Arthur nearly yelled. "These are for her," he explained, brandishing the 5 new tickets. "Oh, I see. How nice." She smiled sickeningly at both of them. "Well, I do hope you—" "Yes," snapped Arthur. "Thank you." Owen finally departed to the table next to theirs. Arthur turned desperately to Fanny, and was relieved to see that she was rocking with silent laughter. He sighed and smiled. "Where were we? You were calling me Fanny, and I was about to ask you not to." "What do you mean?" She swirled a little wooden cocktail stick in her tomato juice. "It's why I asked if you were a friend of my brother's, or half-brother, really. He's the only one who calls me Fenny, and I'm not fond of him for it. So what's Fenchurch? What? Fenchurch? Fenchurch?" She looked at him sternly. "Yes. And I'm watching you like a lynx to see if you're going to ask the same silly question that everyone asks me until I want to scream. I shall be cross and disappointed if you do. Plus, I shall scream. So watch it." She smiled, shook her hair a little forward over her face, and peered at him from behind it. "Oh," he said, "that's a little unfair, isn't it?" "Yes." "Fine. All right," she said with a laugh. "You can ask me. Might as well get it over with. Better than having you call me Fenny all the time." "Presumably," said Arthur. "We've only got 2 tickets left, you see, since you were so generous when I spoke to you before." "What?" snapped Arthur. The woman with the perm and the smile, and the now nearly empty book of cloakroom tickets, was waving the 2 last ones under his nose. "I thought I'd give the opportunity to you because the prizes are so nice." She wrinkled up her nose a little confidentially. "Very tasteful. I know you'll like them. And it is for Angie's retirement present. You see, we want to give her a kidney machine. Yes, here," said Arthur. He held out two more 10-pence pieces to her, and took the tickets. A thought seemed to strike the woman. It struck her very slowly. You could watch it coming, like a long wave on a sandy beach. "Oh, dear," she said. "I'm not interrupting anything, am I?" She peered anxiously at both of them. "No, it's fine," said Arthur. "Everything that could possibly be fine is fine," he insisted. "Thank you," he added. "I say," she said in a delighted ecstasy of worry, "you're not in love, are you?" "It's very hard to say," said Arthur. "We haven't had a chance to talk yet." He glanced at Fenchurch. She was grinning. The woman nodded at him with knowing confidentiality. "I'll let you see the prizes in a minute," she said, and left. Arthur turned with a sigh back to the girl he found it hard to say whether he was in love with. "You were about to ask me a question," she said. "Yes," said Arthur. "We can do it together if you like," said Fenchurch. "Was I found?" "In a handbag," joined in Arthur. "In the left luggage office," they said together. "At Fenchurch Street Station," they finished. "And the answer," said Fenchurch, "is no." "Fine," said Arthur. "I was conceived there." "What? I was in the luggage office?" hooted Arthur. "No, of course not. Don't be silly. What would my parents be doing in the left luggage office?" she said, rather taken aback by the suggestion. "Well, I don't know," sputtered Arthur. "Or rather, it was in the ticket queue. The ticket queue. Or so they claim. They refuse to elaborate. They only say, you wouldn't believe how bored it is possible to get in the ticket queue at Fenchurch Street Station." She sipped demurely at her tomato juice and looked at her watch. Arthur continued to gurgle chirpily for a moment or two. "I'm going to have to go in a minute or two," said Fenchurch, "and you haven't begun to tell me whatever this terrifically extraordinary thing is that you were so keen to get off your chest." "Why don't you let me drive you to London?" said Arthur. "It's Saturday. I've got nothing particular to do. "No," said Fenchurch. "Thank you. It's sweet of you. But no, I need to be by myself for a couple of days." She smiled and shrugged. "But you can tell me another time. I'll give you my number." Arthur's heart went boom, boom, churn, churn, as she scribbled 7 figures in pencil on a scrap of paper and handed it to him. "Now we can relax," she said with a slow smile which filled Arthur till he thought he would burst. "Fenchurch," he said, enjoying the name as he said it. "I a box of cherry liqueur, and also, and I know you'll like this, a gramophone record of Scottish bagpipe music." "Yes, thank you, very nice," insisted Arthur. "I just thought I'd let you have a look at them," said the perm woman, "as you're down from London." She was holding them out proudly for Arthur to see. He could see that there were indeed a box of cherry brandy liqueurs and a record of bagpipe music. That was what they were. "I'll let you have your drink in peace now," she said, patting Arthur lightly on his seething shoulder. "But I knew you'd like to see." Arthur re-engaged his eyes with Fenchurch's once again, and suddenly was at a loss for something to say. A moment had come and gone between the two of them, but the whole rhythm of it had been wrecked by that stupid, blasted woman. "Don't worry," said Fenchurch, looking at him steadily from over the top of her glass. "We will talk again." She took a sip. "Perhaps," she added, "it wouldn't have gone so well if it wasn't for her." She gave a wry smile and dropped her hair forward over her face again. It was perfectly true. He had to admit, it was perfectly true. Chapter 13. That night, at home, as he was prancing around the house, pretending to be tripping through cornfields in slow motion, and continually exploding with sudden laughter, Arthur thought he could even bear to listen to an album of bagpipe music he had won. It was 8 o'clock, and he decided he would force himself, to listen to the whole record before he phoned her. Or maybe he could leave it till tomorrow. That would be a cool thing to do. Or next week sometime. No, no games. He wanted her and didn't care who knew it. He definitely and absolutely wanted her, adored her, longed for her, wanted to do more things than there were names for with her. He actually caught himself saying things like, "Yippee!" as he pranced ridiculously around the house. Her eyes, her hair, her voice, everything. He stopped. He would put on a record of bagpipe music. Then he would call her. Would he perhaps call her first? No. What he would do was this. He would put on the record of bagpipe music. He would listen to it, every last banshee wail of it. Then he would call her. That was the correct order. That was what he would do. He was worried about touching things in case they blew up when he did so. He picked up the record. It failed to blow up. He slipped it out of its cover. He opened the record player. He turned on the amp. They both survived. He giggled foolishly as he lowered the stylus onto the disc. He sat and listened solemnly to a Scottish soldier. He listened to Amazing Grace. He listened to something about some Glen or other. He thought about his miraculous lunchtime. They had just been on the point of leaving when they were distracted by an awful outbreak of yoo-hooing. The appallingly permed woman was waving to them from across the room like some stupid bird with a broken wing. Everyone in the pub turned to them and seemed to be expecting some sort of response. They hadn't listened to the bit about how pleased and happy Angie was going to be about the £4.30 everyone had helped to raise toward the cost of her kidney machine, had been vaguely aware that someone from the next table had won a box of cherry brandy liqueurs, and took a moment or two to cotton to the fact that the yoo-hooing lady was trying to ask them if they had ticket number 37. Arthur discovered that he had. He glanced angrily at his watch. Fenchurch gave him a push. Go on. Go and get it. Don't be bad-tempered. Give them a nice speech about how pleased you are, and you can give me a call and tell me how it went. I want to hear the record. Go on. She flicked his arm and left. The regulars thought his acceptance speech a little over-effusive. It was, after all, merely an album of bagpipe music. Arthur thought about it and listened to the music and kept breaking into laughter. Chapter 14. Ring, 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 ring. Hello, yes, that's right, yes. You'll have to speak up. There's an awful lot of noise in here. What? No, I only do the bar in the evenings. It's Yvonne who does lunch. And Jim, he's the landlord. No, I wasn't on. What? You'll have to speak up. What? No, I don't know nothing about no raffle. What? No, I don't know nothing about it. Hold on, I'll call Jim. The barmaid put her hand over the receiver and called over the noisy bar. Here, Jim! Look on the phone says something about how he's won a raffle. Keeps on saying it's ticket 37 and he's won. No, there was a guy in the pub here won, shouted back the barman. He says, have we got the ticket? Well, how can you think he's won if he hasn't even got a ticket? Jim says, how can you think you've won if you haven't even got the ticket? What? She put her hands over the receiver again. Jim, he keeps effing at me saying that there's a number on a ticket. Of course there was a number on the ticket. It's a bloody raffle ticket, wasn't it? He says he means it's a telephone number on the ticket. Put the phone down and serve the bloody customers, will you? Chapter 15. 8 hours west sat a man alone on a beach mourning an inexplicable loss. He could only think of his loss in little packets of grief at a time, because the whole thing was too great to be borne. He watched the long, slow Pacific waves come in along the sand, and waited for the nothing that he knew was about to happen. As the time for it not to happen, at the time for it not to happen, it duly didn't happen. And so the afternoon wore itself away, and the sun dropped beneath the long line of the sea, and the day was gone. The beach was a beach we shall not name, because his private house was there, but it was a small sandy stretch somewhere along the hundreds of miles of coastline that runs west from Los Angeles, which is described in the new edition of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in one entry as junky, wonky, lunky, stunky, and what's that other word, and all kinds of bad stuff, woo. And in another, written only hours later, as being like several thousand square miles of American Express junk mail, but without the same sense of moral depth. Plus the air is, for some reason, yellow. The coastline runs west and then turns north up to the misty bay of San Francisco, which the guide describes as a good place to go. It's very easy to believe that everyone you meet there is also a space traveler. Starting a new religion for you is just their way of saying hi. Until you've settled in and got the hang of the place, it's best to say no to 3 questions out of any given 4 that anyone may ask you, because there are some very strange things going on there, some of which an unsuspecting alien could die of. The hundreds of curling miles of cliff and sand, palm trees, breakers, and sunsets are described in the guide as boffo, a good one. And somewhere on this good boffo stretch of coastline lay the house of this inconsolable man, a man whom many regarded as being insane, but this was only, as he would tell people, because he was. One of the many, many reasons why people thought him insane was the peculiarness of his house, which, even in a land where most people's houses were peculiar in one way or another, was quite extreme in its peculiarness. His house was called the outside of the asylum. His name was simply John Watson, though he preferred to be called, and some of his friends now reluctantly agreed to call him, Wonko the Sane. In his house were a number of strange things, including a gray glass bowl with 8 words engraved upon it. We can talk of him much later on, so this is just an interlude to watch the sun go down and say that he was there watching it. He had lost everything he cared for, and was now simply waiting for the end of the world, little realizing that it had already been and gone. Chapter 16. After a disgusting Sunday afternoon spent emptying rubbish bins behind a pub in Taunton and finding nothing, no raffle ticket, no telephone number, Arthur tried everything he could to find Fenchurch, and the more things he tried, the more weeks passed. He raged and railed against himself, against fate, against the world and the weather. Even in his sorrow and his fury, went and sat in the motorway service station cafeteria where he'd been just before he met her. It's the drizzle that makes me particularly morose. Please shut up about the drizzle, snapped Arthur. I would shut up if it would shut up drizzling. Look, but I'll tell you what it will do when it shuts up drizzling, shall I? No, bladder. What? It will bladder. Arthur stared over the brim of his coffee cup as the grisly outside world. It was a completely pointless place to be, he realized, and he had been driven there by superstition rather than logic. However, as if to bait him with the knowledge that such coincidences could in fact happen, fate had chosen to reunite him with the lorry driver he had encountered there last time. The more he tried to ignore him, the more he found himself being dragged back into the whirlpool of the man's exasperating conversation. I think, said Arthur vaguely, cursing himself for even bothering to say this, that it's easing off. Ha! Arthur just shrugged. He should go. That's what he should do. He should just go. It never stops raining, ranted the lorry driver. He thumped the table, spilled his tea, and actually, for a moment, appeared to be steaming. You can't just walk around without responding to a remark like that. Of course it stops raining, said Arthur. It was hardly an elegant refutation, but it had to be said. It rains all the time, raved the man, thumping the table again, in time to the words. Arthur shook his head. Stupid to say it rains all the time, he said. The man's eyebrows shot up and fronted. Stupid? Why is it stupid? Why is it stupid to say it rains all the time if it rains all the time? Didn't rain yesterday. Did in Darlington. Arthur paused warily. You're going to ask me where I was yesterday, asked the man. No, said Arthur, but I expect you can guess. Do you? Begins with a D. Does it? And it was pissing down there, I can tell you. You don't want to sit there, mate, said a passing stranger in overalls cheerily to Arthur. That's Thundercloud Corner, that is. Reserved special for old raindrops keep falling on my head here. There's one reserved in every motorway calf between here and sunny Denmark. Steer clear is my advice. It's what we all do. How's it going, Rom? Keeping busy? Got your wet weather tires on? Ha! He breezed by, I went to tell a joke about Britt Eklund to someone at a nearby table who roared with laughter. See? None of them bastards take me seriously, said Rob McKenna. But, he added darkly, leaning forward and screwing up his eyes, they all know it's true. Arthur frowned. Like my wife, hissed the sole owner and driver of McKenna's all-weather haulage. She says it's nonsense and I make a fuss and complain about nothing, but, he paused dramatically and darted out dangerous looks from his eyes, she's always brings the washing in when I phone to say I'm on my way home. He brandished his coffee spoon. What do you make of that? Well, I have a book, he went on. I have a book, a diary, kept it for 15 years, shows every single place I've ever been, every day, and also what the weather was like, and it was uniformly horrible. All over England, Scotland, Wales I've been. All around the continent, Italy, Germany, back and forth to Denmark, been to Yugoslavia. It's all marked and charted. Even when I went to visit my brother in Seattle. Well, said Arthur, getting up to leave at last. Perhaps you'd better show it to someone. I will, said Rob McKenna, and he did. Chapter 17. Misery, dejection. More misery and more dejection. He needed a project, and he gave himself one. He would find where his cave had been. On prehistoric Earth, he had lived in a cave. Not a nice cave, a lousy cave, but there was no but. It had been a totally lousy cave, and he hated it. But he had lived there for 5 years, which made it home of some kind, and a person likes to keep track of their homes. Arthur Dent was such a person, and so he went to Exeter to buy a computer. That was what he really wanted, of course, a computer, but he felt he ought to have some serious purpose in mind before he simply went and blew a lot of bread on what people might otherwise mistake as being just a thing to play with. So that was his serious purpose, to pinpoint the exact location of a cave on prehistoric Earth. He explained this to the man in the shop. Why? Said the man in the shop. This was a tricky one. Okay, skip that, said the man in the shop. How? Well, I was hoping you could help me with that. The man sighed, and his shoulders dropped. Have you much experience of computers? Arthur wondered whether to mention Eddie, the shipboard computer on the Heart of Gold, who could have done the job in a second, or Deep Thought, but decided he wouldn't. No, he said. Looks like a fun afternoon, said the man in the shop, but he said it only to himself. Arthur bought the apple anyway. Over a few days, he also acquired some astronomical software, plotted the movement of stars, drew rough little diagrams of how he seemed to remember the stars to have been in the sky when he looked out of his cave at night, and worked away busily at it for weeks, cheerily putting off the conclusion he knew he would inevitably come to, which was that the whole project was completely ludicrous. Rough drawings from memory were futile. He didn't even know how long ago it had been. Beyond Ford Prefect's rough guess, it was a time that was still a couple of million years, and he simply didn't have the math. Still, in the end, he worked out a method which would at least produce a result. He decided not to mind the fact that with the extraordinary jumble of rules of thumb, wild approximations, and arcane guesswork he was using, he would be very lucky to hit the right galaxy. He just went ahead and got a result. He would call it the right result. Who would know? As it happened, through a myriad of and unfathomable chances of fate, he got it exactly right. Though, of course, he would never know that. He just went up to London and knocked on an appropriate door. Oh, I thought you were going to phone me first. Arthur gaped in astonishment. You can only come in for a few minutes, said Fenchurch. I'm just going out. And we'll leave it there for tomorrow.